So let's say the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Okay, so I think what I would like to do is, even though this story, it's not very long, but it's a little bit longer than we did last time. But I'd like to read through the story and then come back to the beginning and go through it, discussing it. But I'd like to read through it once completely at the beginning. So we'll get a volunteer to start us off, and let's, after a page or two, we'll switch to another reader. Is that okay with everybody?
Sure.
All right.
I can start.
Okay, you're on.
Okay, fate. There was once a poor man who devoted his life to learning Torah in the study hall. One time, an astrologer visited his town. Everyone ran to see him, but the poor man continued studying and did not go. His wife came into the study hall and found no one there except for her husband. Everyone else had all gone to the astrologer. She shouted at him, "You worthless, lazy bum. Why don't you go to the astrologer?" He didn't want to go, but his wife continued nagging him until he had no choice but to go. So he went to the astrologer, who told him that it was his fate to be a thief. Then he returned to his studies in the study hall.
Okay.
Next person. I pass.
Next person.
I'll read.
Thank you.
His wife came running and asked him, "New, what did he tell you?" "He told me a beggar will always be a beggar." That night, he returned home and ate his main meal, a slice of bread. While eating, he began to chuckle, and his wife asked him, "Why are you laughing? You must know something that you don't want to tell me." "Not so," he said. "He didn't tell me anything. I'm not laughing over anything special." And he continued eating. But again he began to laugh, and again she asked him as above, and he answered as above. Then he burst out in roaring laughter, in such a belly laugh that his breath smelled. "You see," she said, "you certainly know something." So he told her, "The astrologer told me that my fate is to be a thief." Someone
Okay,
else?
let's change readers and dance.
I'll pick it up.
Okay, you're on.
I don't want you to be a thief, she said. "I'd rather we be poor. We will manage somehow with what God gives us, but don't become a thief." Shabbat soon came along, and of course they had their Shabbat meals all laid out, black bread for challah and whatever else they had, from which they sat down to eat. And they must have had 4 or 5 daughters who grabbed pieces of bread from each other, for even the bread that they had was not enough to go around. "Gott in Himmel, God in heaven," his wife said, "I've had enough of this. I'd prefer you become a thief so that we don't have to suffer this destitution any longer." And he had no choice but to do as she wished. He wanted to, and he did not want to, but in the end he went. The Rabbi repeated this several times. And so he went out to steal. But from whom should he steal? He decided on the richest man in town. Arriving at the mansion, he found the guards asleep. There was no one around to interrogate him, so he went to the warehouse and found the lock open. This was his fate. He continued over to the safe and found its lock open as well. He took 4 or 5 rubles, just enough to support his family, and he brought them to his wife. "See," he said to her, "I have done as you wish. Use this for the family because I will not steal again." Someone else want to take over?
"I will." "Of course not," she replied. "Neither do I want this. You only had to do this on account of your impoverishedness." But sometime later, she began to shout at him, "You worthless bum, you were in the warehouse. Why didn't you take enough for me to buy a nice coat?" So he had no choice but to go out again to steal. He wanted to and he didn't want to, but in the end he went. He returned to the warehouse and found another thief there who asked him, "Who are you?" "I am a thief." "Who are you?" "I'm also a thief." Okay, next. Judith, you're muted.
Judith.
Here I am.
Okay.
Let's get together and steal, the pauper said to him. It is my fate. And the other thief agreed. Then the pauper thought to himself, if we steal from this man, we will make him into a pauper. On my own, I would only take what was needed for a nice coat. But now the other fellow wants to take a lot, and the owner will be left penniless. So he said to the other thief, why should we take from a Jew? Better, let's go and steal from a Gentile. The other agreed. They decided to go and steal from the king, who happened to live in that town. The pauper was confident that he would succeed in stealing from the king, since this was his fate. The thief suggested, let's steal the king's special two-piece suit that he wore on Coronation Day. It will certainly be enough for many generations. I know where it is kept. The pauper agreed, and he was confident that he would succeed in stealing them, as this was his fate. They went there, entering room after room. Eventually they found the suit. The pockets of the suit were also priceless. After they took them, they began to argue over the suit. Since one piece was larger than the other, the thief claimed that he deserved the larger piece because he knew about them. But the pauper claimed that he deserved the larger share because he had the luck, and it was through his luck they succeeded. So the pauper suggested that he go ask the king.
How can you do that? Said the thief. Nevertheless, answered the pauper, I will go and ask him. If you are able to go and ask the king, then of my own accord I will give you the larger garment, said the thief. So he accompanied him to the king. Someone was lying down next to the king, telling him stories to help him fall asleep. The two thieves picked up the bed on which the king was sleeping and carried it with the king into a different room. Then the king awoke, assuming that he was in the same place. The thief began telling him the story of two thieves and asked the king which one of the two deserves the larger garment. The king was outraged at the question and said, why are you asking me such a question? Obviously, the pauper deserves it since it was his fate. Now tell me another story. The thief told him another story, and the king fell asleep. Then they carried him back into the first room. Next.
In the morning, it was discovered that the king's garments had been stolen. The king remembered that the one who had been lying down next to him telling stories had told him the story of the theft, and asked him which one deserves the larger garment. So he assumed that the storyteller must know about the theft. But despite being beaten, he said he knew nothing. They continued to beat him soundly and torture him, but he stood by his claim that he knew nothing. The king then sent for the archbishop to ask him if indeed this man was perhaps not the thief. The archbishop said that it was indeed possible that he knew nothing, and added that the king was a fool for ruling that the pauper deserves the larger garment. The king was outraged at the archbishop for considering him a fool and wanted to punish him, but his hands were tied.
Meanwhile, a major search for the thief was underway, but nothing was found. The king then decreed that if whoever stole the garment should come forth and acknowledge it, nothing would be done to him. The king just wanted to know how it had been possible to steal those garments. All over, crowds of people were talking about this incident. The pauper approached one of these groups and asked him what they were talking about. Upon telling him, he said, "What's the ruckus about? Whoever stole it will bring it back." This caused an uproar. He approached another group and asked them as well, and they shouted at him, "You bum, you're going to get the death penalty, for everyone is saying that you know about the theft." "Yes," he said, "I do know about the theft." "If you know, you must go and tell," they said. "All right, I will go and tell," he responded. The pauper came in front of the king and told him, "I know about the theft." The king said that he very much would like to meet the thief. "It is I," said the pauper, and with that, the king kissed him.
How did you do it? The king and the pauper asked the king, and the pauper told him the whole story. The other thief was sought, and the second piece of the suit was in his possession also returned. The king then said to the pauper, "I want you to do something."
Then said to the pauper, "I want you to do something to the archbishop." I'm very angry with him. And the pauper said that he would. The pauper instructed to have a suit made for him, identical to that which the archbishop wears when he leaves services. He also had them catch many turtles and bring many candles. He dressed himself in the bishoply garments, bishoply garments, glued a candle to each of the turtles, and allowed them to crawl about throughout the chapel. Stood near the altar and began shouting. Everyone gathered, including the archbishop, who was terrified upon seeing her moving about and hearing screams for no apparent reason. Okay, someone else.
The pauper then said to the archbishop, I have revealed myself to you in order to bring you straight into paradise. With that, the archbishop fell to his face. But before you can enter paradise, the pauper continued, you must first go through hell for a short while. Then I will bring you to paradise. The pauper then instructed the archbishop to get into a sack. And when he had, he went over and tied him in. He then had the sack carried to the king and tied, hanging in the royal courtyard. A proclamation was given out, and everyone gathered and saw that there was someone hanging in the sack, but knew no reason for it. They began throwing stones at the sack. They threw many stones until the archbishop was badly hurt and all his teeth were broken. All the while, the archbishop did not know what was happening. Was this the hell he had been told he would have to endure, or was this some prank?
I'll go. After a while, the king ordered to have the sack thrown down. They threw down the sack and opened it, and the archbishop emerged in great disgrace. In an alternate version of the story, the pauper was eventually hanged, since every criminal gets his due. While he was being led to the gallows, the devil followed him carrying a sack of shoes and told him, how much effort did I invest in this? Did I invest until I caught you? Look at all the shoes I wore out. This is the way of the devil, for it seduces and then it torments, as in the story of the rabbi's son. Are we going to hear that one too?
Well, not right
That's it
now.
for now.
Okay,
Wow.
so it's really kind of a wild, phantasmagoric story with some real humor. Partly I wanted to look at this story because, I don't think normally you think of stories of Nachman of Bratslav as being funny, but this one's actually pretty funny.
Yeah.
And we have a theme that runs through it. Well, there's several themes, but one I want to call attention to begin with is the refrain that everybody does something because they can't resist. They are compelled to do what they are expected to do, whether it's the one thief or the other thief or the king or whoever. All of them do things that they say they don't want to do. And it reminds me of something my grandmother used to say. Did you ever have the feeling you wanted to go and the feeling you wanted to stay?
Yeah.
So that's sort of the leitmotif of this story. So I want to ask, what do you think that kind of uncertainty about doing something that you may not want to do or which you are conflicted about, but nonetheless you are compelled to do? What does that have to do with our study of Mussar, of character development?
Being able to handle temptation.
Okay, say more. What do you have in mind, Stephanie?
Well, if you have in mind that you want to be, let's say, not gluttonous, but there's the sugar to eat. You know, it takes a lot to handle yourself and stay true to what you've resolved to do. And it's so much easier to just take that sugar and stuff it in your mouth and go, yum, 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 yum.
Well, that is certainly true. That's been
Strength,
my experience in life.
right?
Although with me, it's not sugar, it's pizza. However, I mean, it's not quite
Not
as
quite.
direct, perhaps, as you're picturing it. It's not like here's the person and his resolve is tempted, is in danger because of some sort of temptation that's there, and he either resists the temptation or he doesn't. It's a little bit more complicated than that.
So-
Can we fine tune that? Yeah, Michael.
Yes, Kerry. So I think that if we look carefully at ourselves in the present moment,
Mm-hmm.
we have some history in our lives that have gotten us to where we are.
All right. What do you have in
And
mind?
as part of that history, we have a certain set of innate reactions, both to things we think about and the ways in which people react with us. And those ways have developed over time because they have served a certain purpose for our lives.
What's the purpose?
Well, they may have been to protect us.
Okay.
They may have been because we were frightened. They may have been because we felt insecure.
Yeah.
They may have been because by doing that, we got other people to express love to us.
Maybe so.
So it's pretty complicated. It's hard to find all of these things. And so
Yeah,
we come, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So we come to the present moment and someone says something to us. The study of Mussar, as far as I can understand it, is that before we react to what that person said,
Yeah.
we have an opportunity to pause for a moment and
Uh-huh.
try to separate out whether this is something that has become our innate behavior, and therefore is it serving the purpose that it needs to be served right now at this moment.
Yeah. And I want to sort of round out that point, which certainly makes a lot of sense to me. You know, well, it might be, I might be able to illustrate what needs to be added by reminding us of a story, or the story of a saying that is very well known, and you all have probably heard it at one time or another. It's a quote from Rabbi Hillel, who says, "If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am for myself alone, what am I? And if not now, when?" It's the third part that's the kicker, because he's saying, look, you have this moral quandary of self-interest versus altruism. And we could go around and around and around, figuring out, is this the right thing to do? Is that the right thing to do? And there's a pro and a con that we can add continually to the list. But ultimately, you have to do something. And and what it is that you're going to do may not be clearly right or wrong. It may exist within this context of competing possibilities, but you still have an obligation to be responsible and to take action, even though you're not sure that it's right. This seems to me to be a saying that is kind of a controlling point of view in the background of this story. All these characters do things in the context of not being able to decide what's the right thing to do, but they are compelled to act anyway. So here's a way that I think that this hooks into character development or to growth. The situation we find ourselves in is quite often one where there isn't a clear choice. We couldn't make an argument both for or against a particular action. We could see that there are some positives and some negatives either way. And that the more we look at these things about what we should do and what choices we should make, the more complicated and nuanced the choice becomes. So, until it seems like it's not amenable to resolution. And yet, the responsible person has to act anyway. So how does that illuminate the question of our character development?
Tim has got his hand up.
Yeah,
Sorry?
I have my hand up. Well,
Oh, okay, sorry. Go ahead.
I have a few things. One is astrologers are kind of looked down upon in Judaism, aren't they?
They are.
Is that important to the story?
It is important to the story.
Oh, okay.
Why is it that astrologers are denigrated in the Jewish tradition?
Might be an answer to that. And there's a Buddhist saying, pulled by karma, led by vow. And if you think of karma as the what the astrologer predicted, this is your karma. This is something I see in you. This is something when you don't make a choice. And then the
Yes.
how you could substitute the word commandments or character.
Yeah.
And so
I think you're right on the money there, Kim. I mean, the point is that the astrologer is a stand-in for the elimination of choice and of responsibility. If something is ordained, whether we call it kismet or whatever we might, karma or whatever, it doesn't really matter. The choice of who we are going to be and how we're going to act is effectively taken out of our hands while we give it up, is what I should probably say.
in Hinduism, there's less option to not be a product of your karma.
Yes, that is very true. The point here is that at bottom, what Mussar is about taking responsibility for who you are going to become and what actions you're going to take that lead you forth on that journey to what you are going to become.
Despite who you are, which is what the astrologer kind of saw.
Well, I think the point about the astrologer is that these are things that are fated, that you don't really have a choice, that whatever you might decide to do, the outcome is going to be the same.
I think that's the objection we have toward the idea of sin, that all of us are sinners, that, we don't have a choice. We're on it.
Well, I think in the Jewish conception, sin is always a choice. You have a mitzvah, a commandment, and you know what it is that's required of you, but you don't choose to do it.
But it's not our internal essence.
No, it is not our internal essence. Now, we've talked about this in other contexts with regard to the sacrifices or other things, there's nothing inherently in the animal that makes for forgiveness or salvation or whatever. It's the following of the choice to follow the discipline.
But it's also not inherently anything in us.
Which means what, Kim?
That is sin, that is making the wrong choice. We have a choice at every moment. That's all.
Sin is making the wrong choice. And it's compounded when we don't take responsibility for that choice. Whether we follow the lead of the astrologer or not, that is itself a choice. The point about the astrologer is. The astrologer says, this is how it's going to be. This is how it's been determined. And we say, well, okay, that's the way it is.
So our not liking astrologers is not because they're wrong, but because they're not acknowledging that we have a choice.
Yes, I think that that's the bottom line with all sorts of behavior that we would call magical.
And there was something you know that we've heard talked about where some other people would cut apart the insides of an animal, and then
Right.
from that they could predict the future. So it wasn't that Jews thought that they were inaccurate, more
Oh.
that so what?
Well, it's the idea that the responsibility for your actions is taken out of your hands, or you give it up. You somehow conceive of yourself as being forced to act in a certain way, even though you have not resolved the issue for yourself. You have not decided to do A or not A. You just do what you are told, or what you understand is your compulsion.
One
Yeah,
Rabbi, something that Michael said, and that this kind of sticky place of I want to and I don't want to, when you can be a sticky place, but it can also be a pause where you're sitting with what to do. I'm not expressing myself very well, but where you bring, like Michael said, your background and your all that you are to that point where you make a decision. And
Yeah.
what is it about that place where you want to but don't want to? I don't know, that seems like a very special, sticky place that I wish you would address.
Yeah, sure. I think I can say something helpful about that. The point of Hillel's quote is that it is incumbent upon you to act even though you don't know for sure if what you are doing is the right thing. It may or may not be borne out in the future, but what you don't have a choice to do is to do nothing. The idea that we get stuck because of our past histories, or the facing something that is a conundrum. There are lots of reasons why we get stuck and wind up doing nothing. Just as we used to say back in the 60s, going with the flow. It always amazed me that somehow or other the flow always managed to be what we really wanted to do. That in and of itself is a big tell. But the point being that what's the word I'm looking for? A proactive stance of saying, okay, I don't know for sure what's right and what's wrong. I may never know for sure what's right and what's wrong. What's the right course of action? What's the wrong course of action? What I can't do is allow myself to become stuck, to become, to lose our power of choice because of circumstances, whether it's, as Michael was pointing out, a past history, or the irreducible contradiction between two courses of action. The truth of the matter is that we can always make a counter argument. If we're dealing with something that is truly a dilemma, there's always a counter argument. There's always another possibility. It doesn't end. We add possibilities to one side of the ledger and to the other side of the ledger. And the more we think about it, the more possibilities we add. But there's no one condition or one course of action that ends the dilemma for once and for all. We don't ever reach a consideration which says, okay, well, that's it. There's nothing else to consider. There's always another consideration, because that's the nature of a dilemma. dilemmas are by definition irreducible. So the question is, what do you do with the fact that confronting these kinds of very complicated choices, something nonetheless has to be done. And we have to be willing to act even though we are uncertain. That's perhaps the best way of understanding it. We may not know, we may not have the assurance that for sure this is the right thing to do. Whatever choice we make is going to involve a certain level of uncertainty. And that's just the nature of a dilemma. Now, we can approach that a number of different ways. We can try to find a workaround. We can find a way of making somebody else responsible. There are all sorts of things we might do, none of which are exactly demonstrations of integrity. The position of integrity is to make the choice and taking upon yourself the possibility that you may be wrong. But unless you're willing to do that, there's no possibility, or there's at least a lessened possibility of growth. Because what we're doing is we're pawning off the responsibility on someone or something else. And that's a big no-no in terms of spiritual or characterological growth. Does that help to explain it?
It does, definitely. I'm thinking of that pause as an opportunity to grow, but at some point you have to, take a leap and make a choice. But I'm wondering now about the thief. He chooses what you think is the wrong way. He becomes a thief. That's supposed to be bad. He listens to his wife, and she's the little devil on the shoulder, and he goes and becomes a thief. Does he ever think of it as a wrong choice, though, and change his path? It seems as if he continues all the way to the end.
I think that's very insightful. I mean, the point that I would make in that regard is that he is kind of a cipher. He does what he's told. And his wife, by the way, gives conflicting, contradictory advice. At one point she says, "I absolutely don't want you to become a thief." And then she says, "No, it'd be better if you became a thief." This is what we get sometimes by listening to other people. We get lots of advice, but it sometimes is contradictory advice. In the end, that's kind of the point. We're not going to, there's nobody out there, some wise person who's going to tell us this is absolutely, without question, the right thing to do. If they're honest, they are as buffeted about by the possibility of choice as we are.
Well, I agree. I kind of disagree with that.
Okay, tell me what.
Oh, we're hearing on the news all, every day,
Yeah.
one thing after another telling us what the right thing to do is.
Oh, yeah. But it changes all the time.
Yeah.
Is my point.
What Wynn said about that this uncertainty gives us a pause.
Yes.
Make a decision, that process. And I also was thinking of the Talmud as even, all those volumes trying to tell us the right thing to do, and then still many opinions.
Yes. Well, that's kind of a perfect example of what we've been talking about. The legal literature, whether it's the Mishnah or the Talmud, doesn't come up with the correct choice. It comes up with a majority decision. And so both the arguments on one side and the other side of a problem are preserved. Why would you do that? If there is a right decision, why would you bother to retain and keep in the text all the conflicting arguments?
I thought
Yeah.
that the new Supreme Court judge,
Bella, cut it out.
the new Supreme Court justice said that even an originalist would have different interpretations.
Well, that in and of itself is a whole debate that could take us quite a long time. What exactly is an originalist? I don't think there is such a thing.
But yeah, but if even whatever process you use, you're not going to come up with one answer.
I think that's right. I agree with
That's
you
all I'm saying.
wholeheartedly. Yes. But so the question about the pause, which has popped up a couple of times, is the pause can be an opportunity to look at your options and to make a decision, or it can be a space where you get stuck. The argument, it seems to me, is how not to fall into the dangerous position of being stuck and winding up not doing anything. If you think that making a decision is only possible if you know for sure what is the right decision and that there is a right decision, well, then it's not a dilemma. By definition, it's a dilemma where there is never one consideration that tips the balance of the scale forever and always in one direction or the other. If there were such a consideration, it might be a difficult problem, but it's not a dilemma. So, yeah, go ahead.
So I just want to bring it back to sort of this personal spiritual development aspect of Mussar. And, like in a lot of things, as you said, I mean, there's the classic joke of a one-handed lawyer, but that's really the idea.
I never heard that before.
Oh, okay. There are no one-handed lawyers.
On one hand and on the other hand.
Yeah, exactly. And you can read all these things, and this study that I think that we're doing or embarked on is to get a sense of what resonates as a particular path to follow. But the ultimate decision is absolutely different for you and for me.
Sure.
I mean, at an overt level, we might both vote for Biden, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about our own spiritual development, our own movement along this complicated path. And my way of doing it is absolutely different from your way of doing it.
Yes.
And I think what you're pointing out is if I just stand still, which of course is actually impossible,
yes.
Then I don't progress along the path. In fact, there's a good argument to be made that if I stand still and not make a decision, I sink into the quicksand. That is,
yes.
Life gets worse and worse without decisions. So I make decisions, but the decisions I make have to be in the context of how I've begun to understand my life and the effects that other people have on me and the effects I have on other people.
Well, I think that's an important part of this story, Michael, because again and again in the story, the thief gets contradictory advice from either from the same person or from different people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that unfortunately, that's the way our lives are. Mm-hmm. You know, you consult with your friends or you consult with your rabbi or your spiritual advisor or whatever, and you will get contradictory suggestions about what you should do. Mm-hmm. I love this is actually not just in the Fiddler on the Roof, but it is one of the Tevye stories. You know, one guy says, X, and Tevye says, you're right. And the other guy says, Y. And Tevye says, you're right. And somebody says, well, wait a minute, Tevye. Both of them can't be right. And Tevye says, and you're right too. Okay. I mean, that
Yeah.
you can go around forever if you're facing what is truly a dilemma, and there's no end to that process. The question is, what is the nature of your responsibility to act? Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, when we act in the face of a dilemma, we do so without knowing and without having assurances of exactly how it's going to turn out, and whether or not the choice that we have made is the right choice. It might be the right choice and borne out by certain subsequent events, but then there may be other events that come later that says, you know what, that wasn't right. I mean, I think that this is a very, very common experience, and yeah, Kim, what do you want to say?
Well, I think a really important point here that we're not talking about is the conviction that you have to have when you act, even with that uncertainty. I'm looking at the brush painting behind Michael, and that could not come off unless the artist had complete certainty about his stroke. So it's not a halfway thing. Well, this might not turn out well. I mean, when I'm doing my art, I have to be certain, and at the same time, it's a real paradox how this is possible. Or like entering a marriage, you being in a relationship, whatever that is, if you don't do it wholeheartedly, 100%, you're not giving it a fair chance, and yet you know that whatever you do you might say the wrong thing, or you might, so there's that too. But that's a fun balance, I think.
Well, what it seems to me you're pointing to, Kim, is that even though we might make a decision to act on the basis of incomplete information or a lack of resolution of the dilemma, having made that decision doesn't mean that there is no possibility that there won't be further complications as we move along that path.
No, I'm talking about something a little different. Just how our entire effort has to be with the decision that we go with. Like,
I understand that, but as we pursue that course, it may happen that there are other indeterminacies that pop up which we hadn't thought about,
yeah,
or which
sure,
require qualification or recalibration of our direction. So even if we enter into a certain direction or a certain course of action with the kind of commitment that you're talking about, and I'm with you in that 100%, that doesn't mean that somewhere down the line we are going to be confronted by considerations which might have been there from the beginning, but which we didn't see.
Actually, I have a book about this. Well, so I had a philosophy teacher who's still alive in Israel, who was the son-in-law of Martin Buber. I think I told you about that. And
yes,
then
I think you did.
his friend was William Barnett, who wrote a book called The Retreat to Commitment. And it was just about what we're talking about, where you commit yourself fully to an act, but you know also that you may have to change when you get more information.
Yeah, I think that there's
both.
This is an important distinction, because what it points to in some ways is that in the back of our minds, we always knew that there were contraindications. If we are facing a dilemma and we commit ourselves to a certain choice, that happens in the context of having considered other possibilities. And those other possibilities don't disappear without a trace. They're still hanging around.
one of the things in the story, that sticky place that I'm sort of obsessed with, it comes up several times in the story. You know, it's
Yes.
more than one time that he has that dilemma. And it seems to me like if your spiritual practice is in the sticky place, that's where you sit with it. That's where you just sit with it, and that informs, okay, I'll make this decision. And then on down the line, you hit the sticky place again. And once again, you have to sit with it. And then you make the decision to go this way. And then, like in the story, it comes up, the sticky place happens again. And it
Yeah.
seems like the practice is in the sticky place to sit with it and know then what direction I want to act in.
I think you are hitting the nail right on the head. I think the point is that growth happens when you encounter such a sticky place and have to make a decision or take an action or whatever to move forward from that place. When we are stuck there, growth doesn't take place. We're immobilized or paralyzed. But in the purpose of these moments of reflection or moments of confusion or whatever we want to call them, is that it gives us they give us an opportunity to move forward, which is what the process of learning and development is. And that doesn't mean necessarily we're going to be right. Sometimes we learn when we make bad decisions, or bad decisions in the sense that they turn out to be bad decisions, although we didn't know for sure if they were good or bad when we made them. And there's, I'm trying to remember the name of this author. There's a book that I have found very useful, various contexts, called Getting Unstuck. And it addresses this problem directly. What happens and how do we deal with the fact that we, various times, in various ways in our lives, we become stuck and we don't know how, or at least initially, how to move forward, how to take the next step, and what are the prices that we pay for remaining stuck. And even though there are prices, there's a price that is entailed by remaining unstuck, there's also a price of being stuck. There's also a price to be paid for being unstuck. But the difference is that when you're unstuck, you're learning something. When you're stuck, you're not. But both of them have a price that's entailed. And I think that that's what is paralytic in our lives as we are trying to learn and to grow and so forth. Every time we come across one of these dilemmas, our situation is fraught with uncertainty. How do you act when your life or your situation at a particular moment is uncertain? What do you do about that? I think that my feeling about it is that that's where our attempts to grow and to change and so forth get sidetracked. When we encounter one of those moments where the resolution is not clear, and so we become paralyzed, we become stuck. And the question then becomes, how do you get unstuck? What is the wisdom that you need in order to take the next step, even though it may not be clearly the right step? One of my favorite stories in rabbinic literature has to do with a fellow whose name was Nachshon ben Aminadav, who is a very, very minor character in the Torah, but he is the main character in one of the most important stories that is part of the rabbinic tradition. Now, Nachshon ben Aminadav was the fellow who, along with the 600,000 Israelites and the mixed multitude, are on the shore of the sea before the waters part, okay? He's the one who goes into the waters first. The question is, what was it about his action that was important? And the rabbis say it's because of him that the water is parted. Well, he walked into the water and walked in without the expectation that there was safety there. He kept taking another step, even though it brought him closer and closer to the possibility he might drown.
Do you think he had faith? Is that it?
Well, that's a good question that I'm going to leave to the side. And I think that the point is, see, if he has faith that things are going to turn out well, then he's not taking the last step. The last step has to be a step where it's unclear what's going to happen.
Well, he's going to die either way. I mean, or he isn't. I mean, so.
Yes. Yes.
That's the problem.
That courage isn't acting without fear, it's acting in spite of your fear. Or
Yes.
like Kim, you were saying, like with the brush stroke, once you make the decision to act and commit to making that brush stroke, you're committed fully, but there's a little part of you that still remembers the other stuff, or that still has a little trepidation that it's acting, it's being willing to make the brush stroke in spite of your fear.
Yeah,
Well,
it's the same.
In spite of, or maybe even through the fear.
You know, in karate, the people who break the cement block in half, it's that it's not possible to do without putting your whole self into it. But then you might just land on it and not go through too.
That is a possibility. Yeah. I mean, the point I'm making is that in the story about Nachshon, or the example of the karate master, or any number of these situations, the commitment to the action is made even though the outcome is not certain. That's what makes it a commitment. If we know what the outcome will be, we're hedging our bets. It's really not being fully committed.
That's the problem with faith then.
Yes, I think so. And it's not, the notion of faith in Judaism is not the same as we operate with normally, which comes from the Christian tradition. It's not about believing in something despite a lack of evidence. It is believing in something because of the evidence. The idea that of having faith in Christian tradition, this is the way we normally think of it, is that we believe something is going to happen even though there's no reason to believe that it will. No objective reason, no factitious reason, or whatever. We are certain that it's going to happen because we've been assured that it will happen.
Like the rapture.
Sorry?
Like the rapture.
Yes, that's a good example. Very good example. The way that faith or emunah works in Judaism is we believe that something's going to happen because it has happened before, because there's reason to think that it could happen in a different circumstance because it has happened before. It's about the past predicting the future based on past activities. So why do we think that we might have certain benefits or certain growth? Well, because we have the example of the liberation from Egypt. That gives us certain assurance that things can happen in a salvific sort of way again, because they have happened before. That's what faith is in Judaism. It's not to say that there's no reason or no evidence to sustain the faith, and we're going to believe it anyway, which is what we normally take faith to be. So these are ideas that all intertwine. So the idea of growth from the perspective of Judaism is not that it's absolutely sure about what's going to happen if we elect a certain course of action or we make a certain kind of decision. It's that it appears to us to be a choice we can make, but we don't know absolutely surely that there will be a certain outcome. We think maybe there will be, but there's going to be an outcome no matter which we choose. So we make the choice and we hope that it's the right one, and maybe it will be and maybe it won't, and maybe we have to engage in course correction like the Apollo moonshot, or whatever comes up in that context. We take actions always when we're faced with dilemmas without guarantees.
That's life.
That is life. Exactly so. But we hedge it all the time, or we try to hedge it. And that's, from the standpoint of the Jewish tradition, seems to me, as I understand it, that's a big mistake. So we take actions in the hope that it's going to be the right one, and it maybe is the right one, but it may not be the right one for all eternity. And maybe the circumstances change, and down the line we have to reevaluate, or it may turn out to be just wrong. Well, that's happened in people's lives too. And yet you still have to make the choice. You still have to take the step, like Nachshon ben Aminadab, who goes into the water, not knowing what's going to happen, taking a step and another step and another step, not because he knows that this step is still safe, but this might be an unsafe step. He's going to take it anyway, and we'll see what happens. That's one of the parts I love about this story so much, when the wife says, "No, so what did you learn?" I can hear my grandmother talking, So, anyway, all right, we should stop here for today. We hit 1 o'clock, and I want to thank you all for being part of our discussion today.
Thank you.
And I hope you were as stimulated and entertained as I was.
Yes.
And we'll see each other again next Friday.
All right.
It was fun and it makes you think.
Yeah.
All right,
Best of all worlds.
that's my aim, Judith. All right, have a good Shabbos, everybody.
Yes.